All right, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you all for joining so much today. We're really excited to have you here with us to dig into the topic of TANF child-only cases, which are the cases in which children receive TANF cash assistance, but their parents do not. I know attendees will likely have a range of how knowledgeable they are regarding this topic today. And because of that, we've developed this webinar with the intent of meeting you wherever you're at. So whether you're here to simply learn about TANF child-only cases, learn more about current issues affecting these cases, or interested in figuring out how to better support TANF child-only cases within your agency. So first, today's webinar is developed on behalf of OFA, so I wanted to give them a moment to say hello. Next slide, please. James, your cue whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, which focuses on how TANF agencies can identify needs and enhance support for their child-only caseload. I'm James Butler, as Janetta just mentioned, and I serve as one of the Family Assistance Program Specialists here in the Office of Family Assistance within the Administration for Children and Families. We are glad to have you join us today and are excited to welcome a fantastic group of presenters who will be walking you through multiple aspects of this topic. So I will now turn things back to Janetta, who will move us forward on this presentation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, James. So yes, hi, welcome again. My name is Janetta Deppa, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm a research associate at MEF Associates, and I'm also the program manager for the PeerTA contract, which MEF administers on behalf of the Office of Family Assistance. So we have first a couple of slides to go over with you all, and then we're going to jump right into presentations today. So we have several learning objectives for our webinar with you all. First, it's to understand the current composition of TANF child-only cases. In addition, we're hoping that you learn to, or that it helps you generate ideas for programs and services that are able to support child-only families, and also that you understand the unmet needs of child-only cases. And, you know, I come away with this with some ways to address these needs. We hope this information is both informative and also pragmatic for your program and then the people that you serve. So as James mentioned, we have such an awesome panel of speakers today, and we'll be introducing them all to you a little later on. On a high level, our speakers are going to start off by providing some background context into this topic. We're also going to spend some time identifying current needs and issues affecting child-only recipients and unpacking existing gaps in service for these recipients and their families. We have speakers today who will talk to you about specific categories of child-only cases, including children being raised by kinship and by family, grandfamilies. And we will also learn about why child-only cases are important for kids in immigrant families. We'll also hear some more about the types of services that can be made accessible to serve child-only recipients. All right, so a quick note on using our Zoom platform today. I'm sure all of you have developed a knowledge of using Zoom over the past few years, but just a couple of things to note. So that black toolbox at the bottom of your screen, first, we're going to be disabling chat for today's session, but the way in which you can interact is by using that Q&A button. So throughout the presentations, if you have any questions for our speakers, please direct them to that box, that little Q&A box. If you click that, it'll pull up that that rectangular box that says welcome to Q&A, and you can type your question right there, and it'll get directed to all of us. So we'll be compiling a list of these questions, and then we will be answering all of these questions at the end of all of the presentations during our Q&A session. Additionally, if you want, you can enable subtitles. I see a few people have already done that, which is great. And so subtitles are closed captions to this webinar. To do that, you click the little CC show captions link also at the bottom of your toolbar. If you're having any technical difficulties or these screens aren't appearing for you, please reach out to us by using that Q&A box, and then one of my colleagues will reach out to assist you. Great. So finally, before we begin presentations today, a little pop quiz for you all. We're interested in your thoughts. What do you think are the percentage of child-only cases that make up the total percentage of TANF cases nationally? I'll give a few seconds for everybody to answer. All right, a few more seconds. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to end the poll just in the interest of time and share our results. So a little over, or actually about 50% of you thought that it's about that 50%, that 52% ratio. So great to hear those responses. I'm not going to give you the answer just yet. That'll be in our first presentation, so keep on the lookout for that. And I think with that, we are ready to turn over to Kristen. So Kristen Joyce is a senior researcher at Mathematica, specializing in qualitative research and implementation evaluations of public benefit and employment and training programs for families with low income. Previously, she was a SNAP assistant director in Massachusetts and was a social science analyst focused on TANF policy in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Kristen, I'll turn it over to you as our first speaker.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Janetta. Thanks everybody for joining and for having me here today. So I'm going to start our discussion with describing the TANF child-only caseload and then some of the needs of the children and caregivers in these families. Next slide. So I'm going to start by reviewing the project that this research was a part of, and then describe the TANF child-only caseload size, composition, and trends. And I'll conclude with discussing some of the needs and service gaps that we know exist for these families. Slide. So the research I'll be describing today was done as part of the Aspire project that Mathematica conducted with Insight Policy Research. We did this in 2017 through 2019. And in 2018, we examined the needs of TANF child-only cases and available services to meet those needs by doing a few things. We scanned available literature, we analyzed federal data, and we interviewed a select group of TANF staff and some subject matter experts. And then I've since updated our federal data analysis with the latest information from 2021 for the presentation today. Next slide. So now I'll describe the TANF child-only caseload and its dynamics. But first, importantly, what is a TANF child-only case? So a TANF child-only case is one in which a parent is ineligible to receive TANF cash assistance, but his or her children are eligible, or one in which a child is living with another usually related adult who is ineligible to receive TANF cash assistance. And I'll note that in some states, children can be living with non-relatives and receive TANF benefits. So there are three main types of TANF child-only cases that make up about 97% of the child-only cases nationally, and I'll work through each of those groups. So the non-parent caregiver cases, and those include children raised by grandparents, are the biggest group. That's 52% of the national caseload. And non-parent caregiver cases are created in a few ways. They can be through the foster care system when children are placed in the care of relatives, and that's through formal or informal foster care arrangements. Or it can be when relatives step in without child welfare involvement to care for children whose parents aren't otherwise able to care for them. And then the second largest group is the U.S. citizen children of immigrants who are ineligible for benefits. That's 23% of the TANF child-only caseload. And these cases occur when low-income, non-citizen immigrants have children who are U.S. citizens. And so those children qualify for TANF cash assistance, but the parents do not due to their immigration status. And then that third largest group is children of parents with a disability receiving SSI, and that's federal disability benefits, and that's another 22%. And SSI recipient parent-child only cases typically arise when a parent who receives TANF cash assistance begins receiving SSI for their disability. And when this occurs, the parent then becomes ineligible for TANF, but the children can continue to receive cash benefits. And these cases can also arise when a parent already receives SSI and then applies to TANF just for the children. And then the remaining child-only cases have a parent in the assisted unit who's no longer receiving benefits, and that's can be due to a sanction for not complying with TANF requirements. That's another 2%. And then the final 2% is of cases for not included for other reasons, including meeting that 60-month federal TANF time limit. So answering that poll question, child-only cases represent slightly over half, 52% of the total TANF caseload as of FY 2021. And the story here is, since TANF replaced the Aid to Families with Dependent Children, or AFDC program in 1996, the overall size of the TANF caseload has decreased dramatically. And during that time, the number of adult recipient cases decreased more quickly than the number of child-only cases, and that really altered the composition of the TANF caseload to now be more heavily made up of child-only cases. So you can see here in 1996, 21% of the caseload was child-only, and now that's more than doubled to 52% in FY 2021. Slide. But the composition of the TANF child-only caseload really varies a lot by state. And you can see that here in this table. So nationally, while child-only cases make up, again, about 50% of the TANF caseload, the percentage ranges from 19% in Hawaii to 98% in Idaho. And this also holds true for those different types of child-only cases. So while non-parent caregiver cases are 52% nationally, they're only 15% of the caseload on Rhode Island, and they're actually 100% of the child-only caseload in Oklahoma. And then while 9 states have 0 ineligible immigrant parent-child-only cases, those cases make up to 59% of California's child-only caseload. Next slide. So now I'm going to describe the characteristics and needs of the child-only cases by these 3 types. And most TANF programs we spoke with for our Aspire project didn't collect information on characteristics and needs of the child-only families. So most of the information I'll be sharing today is coming from literature. And that available literature and the reports that we did hear from some TANF programs really suggests that the parents and the caregivers and children in these TANF child-only cases really do face significant needs that hinder their ability to reach economic security. And those needs do vary a lot across those main types of child-only cases. And I will just note that the needs we identified were based again on the literature, and those were focused just in a couple single jurisdictions, so they may not be generalizable to other areas. So starting with the non-parent caregiver cases, so in our research, we found that the adults and children in these cases are often older than adults and children in other TANF cases, and that the adults, again, are often grandparents raising grandchildren. And in FY 2021, 24% of all children in child-only cases were living with their grandparents. We also found the adults and the children in these cases have many unmet service needs. For adults, those needs include support groups, respite care, and additional financial assistance, support children they're caring for. And then the children in these cases face mental health issues, educational difficulties. Some have former abuse, neglect, and trauma in their lives, similar to children in foster care. And their unmet service needs include mental health counseling and education and employment services for older youth. And in the Aspire interviews with the 3 TANF programs that we talked to, we found that these families might also need additional financial support to provide for the children because the adults might be on fixed incomes or might not have the required resources. Grandparent caregivers might also need emotional support to cope with adult children who can no longer care for their own children or any grief and conflict associated with that. And these families also need support in understanding the benefits and services that are available to them. Next slide. So for the ineligible immigrant parent-child only cases, we found that they're more similar to cases with adult recipients than other types of child-only cases. The adults have been found to be similar in age to adults in adult recipient cases. They often live with their children and work like adult recipient cases, but they have been found to have lower educational attainment than those other adults, as well as low earnings. These adults also have many unmet service needs, including jobs, job training and work supports, parenting support, basic needs, nutritional assistance or housing, case management, and English as a second language services. And then the children in these cases have been found also to be similar in age to children in adult recipient cases. They've also been found to have fewer behavioral health issues and less involvement with child welfare and homelessness than other types of child-only cases. And then for the SSI parent cases, the adults are also often older than adults in adult recipient cases. They have reported experiencing material hardship and hunger and have been found to have lower educational attainment than adults in adult recipient cases. And some of their unmet needs include childcare, healthcare services, respite care, and financial assistance to help for things like children's educational expenses. And 2 state programs that we interviewed thought these families might also need parenting support due to having a disability and other complex needs that might potentially limit their ability to parent. And then the children in these cases are often older than children in adult recipient cases. They've been found to face behavioral and health issues and are more likely to have diagnosed mental health challenges than children in other TANF cases, although not more likely than those children in the non-parent caregiver cases. And then some children in these cases have also been found to have experienced abuse and neglect or interactions with the child welfare system. So I'll conclude by saying, just despite the needs of all these child-only families that I've been describing, TANF programs really do tend to focus their limited block grant resources on services for those adult recipient families, in part because they're subject to the work requirements. But there is an opportunity here for TANF programs to take a broader focus that would intentionally target the child-only population, and that may lead to improved outcomes for these families' health and well-being. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from the other panelists about these opportunities today. And that is my email address. If you have any questions or would like more information, kjoyce@mathematica-mpr.com. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Kristen, for starting us off with all that context. All right, so our second speaker is Beltran, who is an attorney and director of the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network, which is a national technical assistance center at Generations United. For over 20 years, Ana has worked with Generations United on the array of issues impacting grandfamilies, providing in-person TA and training to state agencies, legislatures, nonprofit organizations, and legal providers in over 35 states, and virtual technical assistance in almost all 50. All right, send it over to you, Ana.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, Kristen. And such a pleasure to be with you all today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to talk about that majority of the child-only caseload, which is kinship and grandfamilies and children being raised in those families. Next slide, please. We at Generations United, which is a national nonprofit located in DC, in Washington, DC, have been working on and with the grandfamilies and kinship families. And we use those two terms interchangeably to mean grandparents, other relatives, and close family friends who raise children when parents aren't present. And we have been working with the families and on behalf of the families for decades now. We've had a national center on grandfamilies, still do, which has a national network of caregiver advocates in almost every single state, which you can tap to make the case for these TANF supports and other supports for these wonderful families. Since 2021, we have also been running the first ever federally funded National Technical Assistance Center on the families, and I have the privilege of being the director of that center. So or that network, I guess is what we call ourselves. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the things that we do and focus on. And we're not striving to help the families directly, because communities, states, tribes, territories, they do that best. They know the laws, what TANF's even called in the jurisdiction, because we know it has different names depending on where one lives. So, but what we can do and what we have been doing is elevating promising practices from here, there, and yonder so that others can replicate it and do good by the families and help support them. And you'll see that TANF at the very far right end of our umbrella is one of the 8 systems that we consider most fundamental and critical for these families, and really critical support. And you as TANF agencies may not see them or call them kinship or grandfamilies. You may just know you have grandparents raising grandchildren on your caseload. So that's one of the obstacles we have, is just the terminology, but know that everything we do is intended to support you in helping the families. So on the next slide, you'll see some of the things that we do, including monthly webinars. If you have a question, like who has a good video showing how to do an application for TANF, whatever it is, there's a form there where you can ask us, and all of our services are free of charge. On the next slide, you will see a picture of our website, which launched in the fall, because we're only about 1.5 years old, launched in the fall. And at the top, you'll see resource library. And we have a number of resources there aimed to help make your life easier, hopefully. Next slide, please. So who are these children in kinship grandfamilies, and why is TANF such an important support for these families? Well, these are children that go into the care of grandparents and other relatives and kin unexpectedly, often in a traumatic situation. Grandma may not have been expecting to raise a child at this point in her life, or likely wasn't. Maybe getting ready to go on a cruise. We hear these stories all the time. Is in a 55 and older senior only housing program, is retired and enjoying every minute with her peer group. And here come the children. So how do you feed these extra mouths? How do you meet their basic needs with no extra income? So that's why temporary assistance for needy families is such an important support for these families. It helps them meet the children's needs. And you will see that there on this chart, on this slide rather, that there are many more children outside of foster care with relatives than inside foster care with relatives. So for those many, many more children outside of the foster care system with no child welfare involvement, TANF is often the only source of ongoing financial assistance that these families can access. So it's crucially important to them. And something that we haven't talked about yet, and just want to briefly touch on it, is why do we work with these families? Why do we think these families are so important? And what research has shown for decades is that these children, yes, they're abused, they're traumatized, they may be neglected, all these things, their parents died suddenly, but the research shows that these children thrive in the care of relatives. They do better behaviorally, they maintain connections to culture and community. So there are real reasons to promote these families and to help support them for the greater good of our communities. Next slide, please. So in terms of TANF, we have been working to elevate TANF's importance to the families for a while at Generations United. That resource on the left, which I know you can't read, but I put the link at the bottom for where you can find it, that's aimed at the families. It's dated, but it should provide some basic information to them. On the right is more of a piece directed at folks like you to help elevate promising practices that are going on around the country, several of which I've updated and will review today. Next slide, please. So we know TANF's important to these families because it's often the only source of support. What we don't have recent data on, unless one of the presenters wants to elevate something to me that I haven't seen, but the last piece of data that I'm aware of is about 10 years old, and it shows that about only 12% of eligible grandfamilies or kinship families or children in the care of those families access TANF child only. So there are some serious barriers to accessing this support, even though it is so fundamentally important. And the number one barrier we hear about repeatedly, again, we don't have data to show this, but we have countless anecdotes, is that child support assignment. So grandma may not want to assign child support, usually does not want to the state to go after mom and dad, because grandma wants mom and dad to be able to reparent at some point. And grandma knows that if she sicks the state on the parents to collect the child support, that their financial portfolio, their financial picture will just crumble, and that will put another obstacle in the face of being able to reparent. So that assignment piece is a big barrier. Another barrier is just the fact that TANF child only, if you go on state websites, if I was talking to a reporter the other day, they couldn't find anything about TANF child only in whatever state they were calling about. And I was like, think about, you're a reporter, you know where to look. Imagine grandma who doesn't know where to look. She can't find it. She sees TANF, she sees family grants, she sees work requirements, she sees time limits, but she doesn't see child only grants. So it can be kind of buried and hard to figure out unless you're connected to Kinship Navigator programs or the like, which Liliana from ACF will talk about in a minute, but it can be a best kept secret. Also, the application for TANF child only is frequently the family grant application, as you all know, and that asks for caregiver income. It asks all kinds of questions that aren't necessary for the child only grants in many cases. So figuring out how to do that application. And then just kind of inadvertent restrictive rules and policies that sometimes we don't even realize are still on the books and that they're hampering families' access to this important support. So on the next slide, we start talking about how we can solve and address some of these barriers. And some of this stuff is really Captain Obvious kind of stuff, you know, like well, duh. But I think it's still important to kind of think about, which is just including specific information about the TANF child only on your websites, up front in the brochures that you send to caregivers and any resources that you put out for the community. Review existing policies for barriers, so that there's a state, for example, that I was working with that made children ineligible for child-only grants when they go to live with a relative if they had been on a family grant that had been exhausted by the parents. So, that is likely something that many didn't even know was in their policies, but looking for those things and addressing them can be really critical. A few states test caregiver income for child only, not very many and less than ever, to my knowledge, but that still does go on. A really important tip is reviewing the policy for good cause exemption for not assigning child support to the state. So under federal law, there is this good cause exemption. When we had aid to families with dependent children, it was very spelled out by the feds. All of that policy guidance kind of went away. And so a lot of states either don't take advantage of this exemption or limit it to domestic violence instances or fear of violence, which isn't required. So really reviewing that and looking at that good cause exemption and sharing it in plain language with the caregivers and those who serve them, and including it in the brochure and the application, and making sure that the application doesn't contradict the good cause exemption. Another state where the application said, doesn't mention the good cause and then says, I by signing, I swear, I affirm that I have given permission for the state to go after the parents for child support. So looking at those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So what has Massachusetts done? Well, Massachusetts has started to address that biggest barrier, that assignment of child support to the state. And what Massachusetts has done is basically granted kinship caregivers, all kinship caregivers, a good cause exemption. And we heard about it during a series of regional convenings that we had through our Technical Assistance Center last summer. And this right here on this slide is their PowerPoint presentation from last summer, along with some various materials and where it can be found in policy. It's very new, but they're seeing great success with it and they have been pleased. So I encourage you to access that PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Another kind of really easy tip is those videos, which I just briefly mentioned, on how to complete the application when it is that family grant application too, right? So mark out this, fill in this, really low tech stuff, that you can do with an iPhone and a desk, and that's about it. But really walking them through, and New York's got a great example on their website, their Kinship Navigator. Next slide, please. So what Kinship Navigators, and Liliana is going to talk about this next, but really an important entity to partner with. These are programs that you'll learn more about in a moment, but they help the caregivers connect them to services and supports, including TANF. So really important for you all to partner with them. Next slide, please. And training staff, because as we know, this is the age of great staff turnover. People don't necessarily know about these families. Many people don't know what we call these families. Sometimes the families don't know that we call them kinship grandfamilies. So training the staff on their needs, on how to fill out the child only, on what the requirements are. And we produced a webinar, but along with that is a complete fillable PowerPoint template that you can take and complete for your jurisdiction if that's helpful. It's a free resource, so if it's useful, please access it, and there's the link. On the next slide, I'm just going to elevate two policies that you might want to consider that have been successful for some. So one of them is including the children who are raised by victive kin. And by victive kin, we mean caregivers who aren't related to the children by blood, marriage, or adoption, but maybe they're the divorced aunt of the blood uncle. Maybe they're a godparent. Maybe they're a CASA volunteer that knows the child really well. Those are all victive kin. And currently, not many states can victive kin access these TANF child only grants. But we know there are at least 300,000 of these victive kin raising children in grandfamilies around the country. So consider that, and I link here to an Excel spreadsheet where we include information on the states, or at least the definition of the states that include them in being able to access the TANF child only. One last policy to elevate for you is a policy that Washington State has had for, I don't know, at least 15 years. On the next slide, which is concurrent TANF benefits. And what this is if the child is removed from their parents by CPS, by child welfare, and placed with a kin, that the child was removed from parents that were on a TANF family grant, the parents can still retain their complete TANF grant while the child can access a child-only grant. So the child's basically on 2 grants for a little while. And what this does is allow the parents not to lose income at a time when they're trying to reunify with the child, so that that doesn't jeopardize their housing or anything else that makes it feasible for them to reparent. And the relative caregiver can receive a TANF child only that helps meet the child's needs. So that's another policy to consider, and you'll see a link there to the Washington State website. They publicize this policy transparently on their website, which is a phenomenal thing to do. And I believe last but not least, definitely not least, is ask Kinship and Grandfamilies and these caregivers to be at your decision-making table. The more we integrate them and ask them and rely on them to inform policies and practices, the better off we all are. And we have created here a resource where it has some practices around how you can do that as a TANF agency and how you can have them at the table. We have them at our table at the Technical Assistance Center, and they are invaluable. We meet, they're part of the management committee. Next slide. So please stay connected with the network. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter. We just send it out once a month, so we won't drive you crazy with a lot of email. You can scan this or go to our website and you'll see the form at the bottom, I believe. So I appreciate your time today, and it's my pleasure to turn it over to, turn it back to Janetta.
Just 1 second. Thanks so much, Anna. Really, this information has been really valuable, and appreciate all the direct examples and resources you pointed to in it. So yeah, before we move on to our next presentation, we wanted to quick pause and to hear from you all. If you're a TANF, if you're a staff from a TANF agency, we're interested in whether your agency collaborates with Kinship Navigator programs at all. Whether you collaborate often, you've collaborated in the past, you might have collaborated, not quite sure if you've never heard of it. And then feel free, if you know this doesn't apply to you. I see people are already doing that, but select E if you don't work in a TANF office. We'll give a couple more seconds for everybody. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It's kind of an interesting spread of results. I think it's pretty evenly split amongst those that maybe collaborate, not quite sure, and then also who have never heard. I see there's a lot of folks who don't directly work in a TANF office, so glad that you're here today. Helpful to just know like kind of the diversity of folks we have on the line. And interested in, for those who have never heard of this collaboration or are not sure, hopefully this can, be helping the gears going a little bit in your heads today. All right. Great. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liliana Hernandez Chakrabarti. She's a child welfare program specialist in the Children's Bureau Division of Program Implementation. Her portfolio includes the Kinship Navigator programs, Guardianship Assistance Program, the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare, and collaborating with the Department of Education on implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So Lily, that's all you.
Great. Thank you so much, Janetta, and to OFA for allowing us this platform. Looking forward to talk to you a little bit about the Children's Bureau funded Kinship Navigator programs. So we can go to the next slide. So this is the definition in the statute about how Kinship Navigator programs are to assist caregivers in learning about, finding, and using programs and services. That could include, obviously, the TANF Child Only grant. and how these programs will help them meet the needs of the children they are raising and their own needs, and to promote effective partnerships among public and private agencies. Again, most of the Kinship Navigator programs are based out of the child welfare agencies. In some states, they have contracted out to community-based organizations. And so making sure that we have these partnerships between the Kinship Navigator programs and the TANF agency offices. We'll go to the next slide. So we wanted to provide you with just some examples of within the legislation, all states are developing and expanding their Kinship Navigator programs, ideally to include collaboration with 211 or 311, or creating a toll-free hotline that kinship caregivers can call and find out about resources in their area. The programs are to be operated in consultation with kinship caregivers and the youth that are being raised by them. Ideally, programs are providing training to staff on what are the needs of kinship families. Programs have the option to pay for brief legal services, really helping those informal kinship families seek guardianship in probate court and other avenues such as obtaining custody of the children in their care. Most programs have created a Kinship Navigator website with government and community resources, and some programs have established an ombudsman to help caregivers access services. We'll go to the next slide. And this is just to show you an array of, ideally, a Kinship Navigator program would be working in collaboration with all of these different partners. And so you see that public assistance and TANF agencies are one of those. Again, legal services, health, departments of education, and obviously the departments of child welfare. So we'll move to the next slide. So we've been fortunate that as of 2018, Congress has appropriated annually $19 million to support the development, enhancement, and evaluation of Kinship Navigator programs. And so states receive on average between $200,000 to $800,000 a year. There's a formula based on the number of children in that state that are receiving a SNAP food stamp assistance. So all states have this, and actually for next year, we'll have one more tribe. So there'll be 12 tribes that will be able to receive this funding. And we'll provide you with the link on our Child Welfare Information Gateway. It has a link to the state kinship care context, so you can find out who is the lead in your state. We'll go to the next slide. The Children's Bureau clarified in our program instruction 2307 that states can use these funds to also provide concrete supports for families. We heard obviously during the COVID pandemic that families were really struggling, and so wanted to make sure that they could be using some of these funds to provide, bus tokens, passes, gas vouchers, grocery store cards. Really this limited funding has been available to be more flexible, to really help programs be able to provide the supports that they need for kinship caregivers to access existing benefits and services. So if you're working with your state colleagues from the Kinship Navigator program and you don't know if something qualifies, please feel free to have them reach out to me and we can find out what's available under this funding. We'll go to the next slide. So the Family First Prevention Services Act created for the first time the opportunity to allow for Title IV prevention service Kinship Navigator programs that meet the evidence-based requirements of the Title IV Prevention Services Clearinghouse. So there's a lot of different evaluation requirements that are needed for a program to meet that evidence-based standard. So we now have 4 programs whose evaluation has met the standard of either promising or supported. And that's the Ohio Kinship Supports Intervention, the Arizona Kinship Support Services, the Colorado Connected Program, and the Foster Kinship Program out of Nevada. So as of right now, 2 states, Ohio and Colorado, have been fully approved to operate this Title IV Kinship Navigator program. It means it's an open-ended entitlement. The program will be available at 50% match. So regardless of that other funding that has been provided since 2018, that's done every year. And we just don't know if Congress is going to renew that funding in the future. But this funding through the Title IV Kinship Navigator program will continue because it is a state match. So the states are paying 50%. So please talk with your colleagues in your states. We want to make sure that all states are going to have a Title IV Kinship Navigator program, so they can choose to replicate one of these programs that has already met the standard. We'll move to the next slide. So we wanted to give some examples of how Kinship Navigator programs can provide various strategies to support caregivers in accessing TANF child-only programs. We some programs do joint training to TANF administrators and staff on the unique needs of kinship caregivers. Also, Kinship Navigator programs can be co-located in the same building where the TANF agency is located. And we found that by having that close proximity, caregivers are more likely to access TANF benefit programs. Interdisciplinary meetings between Kinship Navigator and TANF program directors to discuss on a case-by-case basis issues that regarding eligibility or other caregiver concerns. And we know that in some cases, caregivers may be eligible for other types of TANF non-recurring short-term benefits that the states may offer. And some TANF and child welfare agencies also have data sharing agreements, and this allows them to really identify all of the kinship families who would then be eligible for TANF child-only grants. We'll move to the next slide. So we wanted to first just provide you with some resources. The first two reference the program instructions that talk about our funding sources. So if you look at the PI 2307, you'll be able to see at the end the estimated allotment of what every state received. Our link to our state kinship care context and our It's All Relative Supporting Kinship Care Discussion Guide. This is a really great resource. It's a training tool for your staff to talk more about what are the needs of kinship families. And then on our childwelfare.gov website, we have an array of different kinship care resources. We'll go to the next slide. And then I wanted to also highlight for you that we have a Child Welfare Information Gateway podcast series, and they have done a great compilation of talking with Kinship Navigator programs around the country. So you can listen to these great podcasts and learn more about the Washington State program that's based out of their Department of Aging. Two of our previous grantees, one out of California, that was a partnership between iFoster and United Ways of California, and 2-in-1. The Kinship Interdisciplinary Navigation KinTech program based out of Florida. Port Gambles, we wanted to highlight one of the tribes, the Port Gambles Salem tribe out of Washington, and how their prevention focus has really helped to make sure that less children are entering foster care because they're receiving the supports that they need. And we also have an episode on the Nevada Foster Kinship Program. And with that, I just wanted to thank you all for this opportunity today and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thanks so much, Lily. Yeah, really appreciate you unpacking all the eligible Kinship Navigator programs and sharing resources. And yeah, the Child Welfare Information Gateway podcasts are awesome. So another plug for them. All right, so on to our next speaker is Juan Gomez. He's a senior policy analyst for CLASP's Immigration and Immigrant Families team. He works with the rest of the team to uplift policies that support immigrant families, such as securing access to public benefits and ensuring that children in immigrant families have the support and resources necessary to succeed. Additionally, he co-chairs the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition's Federal Advocacy Working Group. All yours, Juan.
Hey, everyone. My name is Juan Gomez. As was shared, I work at the Center for Law and Social Policy, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit organization advancing anti-poverty policy. And the Immigration and Immigrant Families team at CLAS works to promote policies that support the well-being and economic security of immigrant families. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation, I'll be going over why TANF child-only cases are important for children in immigrant families, as well as how the public charge rule on immigrant restrictions under the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, or PERORA, impact immigrant eligibility for TANF and children in immigrant families. Next slide, please. So why are TANF child-only cases important for immigrant families? We already learned earlier in the presentation that more than half of TANF child-only cases are child-only cases, but of those child-only cases, nearly a quarter of them, or about 100,000 cases, consisted of children with an immigrant parent. I won't spend time going through this table, but did want to include it as a resource for folks to look back to and refer back to. And this shows TANF child-only cases of children with an immigrant parent by state in fiscal year 2021. Next slide, please. So beyond making up a sizable portion of TANF child-only cases, children in immigrant families also face unique barriers to assistance. Children of immigrants are disproportionately face poverty. They comprise 1/3 of all children in poverty, but represent 1/4 of children in the US total. Despite the vast majority of those children being US citizens themselves, nearly 90% of them are US citizens themselves, they are less likely to be enrolled in public benefit programs like TANF for a variety of reasons, and those include language and cultural barriers, immigration-related consequences, such as becoming a public charge, which I'll cover in a moment, and then just general confusion about eligibility, which often vary by by program, by state, and by status. Next slide, please. So what is public charge? This is a longstanding policy which has implications for immigrants seeking a visa or a green card. Immigrants go through this public charge test as part of their application in obtaining legal status. However, this test is not a part of all immigration applications. Next slide, please. So the only individuals who are actually subject to public charge are those applying for a green card and those applying for a visa. And even then, there are some exceptions. There's exceptions for a few types of visas, survivors of domestic violence, for example, visas obtained that way. There's exceptions for refugees who are not subject to public charge. DACA recipients are not subject to public charge. Green card renewals are not subject to public charge. It's just folks who are applying for the first time for a green card and more generally for visas. There would be a public charge if folks within those exempt statuses, for example, then later on went to apply for a green card or for a visa. However, it's really important to note any benefits used while they were exempt in that exempt status would not count in the public charge test. Next slide, please. So immigration officials use this public charge test to determine if an immigrant is likely to become primarily dependent on the government for support in the future. They consider all of the immigrant's circumstances. Past use of benefits is just one part of a much larger test, and only 2 types of benefits are even considered. Next slide. So the public charge determination is based on what is called an assessment or an assessment of all relevant factors, which is known as the totality of circumstances test. By statute, immigration officers must look at all of these circumstances, things including age and health, financial status, education, skills. No single factor alone can determine whether or not someone is deemed a public charge. Next slide, please. So the only 2 that are considered in a public charge determination, the only 2 public benefits are cash assistance for income maintenance, such as TANF or SSI, and institutionalization for long-term care at government expense, such as nursing homes, but short-term care, such as rehab, would not count in this instance. Some important things I want to note here, as it relates to TANF, this only includes cash assistance, not childcare or other types of TANF benefits, and TANF child-only benefits will not be considered in a parent immigration application. Use of an included benefit does not automatically make someone a public charge. Again, USCIS officers are looking at that totality of circumstances and looking at an immigrant's full application. So even if they do use TANF or have had TANF in the past, that would not itself be a public charge determination. And then also just want to note that very few people applying to Just Status are even eligible for these programs to begin with. However, in some states there are eligibility for local or state funded programs. Next slide, please. So why is there a new public charge rule? In 2019, the Trump administration had significantly changed the longstanding public charge rules, including expanding the public charge test to include additional benefit programs and are currently included. This created a chilling effect across all benefit programs, resulting in children and immigrant families being enrolled in programs at much lower rates, including for TANF. In 2021, President Biden ended that Trump rule and returned to longstanding rules that had existed prior. And then on September 9th, 2022, the Biden administration published a new rule, which will make it stronger and protect against future changes. And that new rule went into effect on December 23rd, 2022. Next slide, please. So this final rule codified longstanding guidance from 1999. So that will be harder for future administrations to change and hopefully protect against future chilling effects with changing the rule suddenly, as we had seen under the Trump administration. Again, cash assistance through TANF and other programs and long-term institutionalization at government expense count in public charge tests. But the Biden public charge rule importantly specifies that a family member's receipt of a public benefit, including for any program listed above, will not count in an individual's public charge test. So what does that mean in terms of child-only cases? If an immigrant applies on behalf of a U.S. citizen child and that child receives TANF, that does not impact the parent being able to apply for a green card later because they themselves were not the recipient of that benefit. Next slide, please. The second barrier to TANF that I wanted to speak about for immigrant families is regarding restrictions that were created when PeerTA passed in 1996. The bill defined qualified immigrants for purposes of eligibility for public benefits. It's important to note that this is a benefit category, not an immigration status. So qualified immigrants included lawful permanent residents or green card holders, as they're also known, and refugees. Non-qualified immigrants included those with temporary protected status. They include DACA recipients, they include undocumented immigrants. And what this law did was essentially make it so that non-qualified immigrants were generally ineligible for all federal public benefits, including TANF. There are some exceptions for emergency Medicaid and disaster aid, and states can also choose to pass laws to cover folks who are not qualified as well. Next slide, please. However, even those qualified immigrants, folks with green cards and folks with green cards in this case, who obtained status after PeerTA were barred from accessing public benefits such as TANF for a period of 5 years. So as soon as they get the green card, the timer starts and they have to wait 5 years before being able to access those benefits. And again, as with everything I've spoken about, there are certain exceptions based on status and state. But similar to this chilling effect of public charge, this means that many children are not being enrolled for TANF and other benefits due to the confusion around eligibility for themselves and their families. This confusing patchwork of eligibility based on, again, state, based on status, based on program, really harms the ability for children, and even in child-only cases in immigrant families, to actually be enrolled. So the next slide, please. So I've included here some resources for folks to refer back to, which have more information on the public charge policy, on the 5-year bar, to refer back to and assure families when they're eligible to make sure that they're accessing these benefits. There's other links here, as was referenced earlier, around Grandfamilies and immigration in that intersection, with really great resources there, as well as state-funded programs, which you can see kind of the intersection of TANF and immigrant families. Thank you so much. And this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Juan. Really appreciate you being here today and sharing all that valuable information with everyone in attendance. All right, so one more question for you all. We were interested if you were aware of any promising programs or services in your area that serve TANF child-only cases. And if you click yes to that, because you do know some, if you'd feel comfortable dropping those into the Q&A section, and we can read some off. Again, being promising programs or services that do support and serve TANF child-only cases. All right, so I'll leave the poll open for a minute more just to get people's feedback. We have one person that says tribal TANF. Do you know of like which specific tribal TANF program? If you would be able to and willing to share that, we'd be interested to know. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and I can share results. And it's not necessarily surprising. I think the majority of you all are not aware of any services that specifically serve TANF child-only families. We also had a little bit of a difficult time identifying instances of services that do support these families when we were developing this webinar. So the hope is that, you know, that this continues to broaden and more services become available, in the future. All right, so now we're going to move on to our final set of speakers. from California's home visiting program. So on the line, we have Ryan Tsukiji, who is the Program Evaluation Section Chief at the California Department of Social Services, or CDSS, overseeing the CalWORKs home visiting program, tribal TANF program, and Indian health clinic program. Ryan began his career in 2010 with CDSS as an analyst in the Fiscal Forecasting Bureau, and since then he's also served as a tribal TANF program analyst and tribal TANF unit manager. We also have Erika Bautista, who serves as an associate governmental program analyst within the CalWORKs home visiting program. She serves as a subject matter expert for the HVP, participates in research and data analysis, and supports participating counties via performance monitoring and technical assistance.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us today. My name is Ryan Tsukiji. I am the section chief over the program evaluation section that oversees the CalWORKs home visiting program here at the California Department of Social Services. Our presentation today will provide a quick overview of some of the historical data that led to the establishment of the CalWORKs home visiting program. And after that, I'll be joined by Erika Bautista, one of our wonderful program analysts, who will provide an overview of the program. So you can keep it on this slide. This slide outlines what we'll be covering today in our presentation. As I mentioned, we'll touch on some of the historical data that led to the development of the CalWORKs home visiting program. Then we'll provide an overview of the program, its key components, its purpose, and the goals for participants. Then we'll share some data on our clients our program serves, which include child-only families. Next slide, please. The California Budget and Policy Center shared information from the U.S. Census Bureau Population Survey for 2016 to 2018. When looking at the data, you can see the official poverty measure and supplemental poverty measure for California were both higher than the U.S. national average. When comparing the two, you can see that the discrepancy between the supplemental poverty measure for California compared to the average for the United States is much greater. The supplemental poverty measure is believed to provide a more accurate measure of the hardships faced by Californians by taking into consideration things like local housing costs, additional non-cash public supports, subtracting non-discretionary expenses, and accounting for modern families. Next slide, please. Here's some additional information that was also provided by the California Budget and Policy Center for fiscal year 2017 and 2018. The data does not include the CalWORKs home visiting program because it had not yet been implemented. But the data revealed that significantly fewer children in California receive home visiting services than those who would have most likely benefited from such services. The stress of poverty makes parenting more challenging than it already is, and the adverse experiences of living in poverty can limit a child's long-term chances for success, increasing the likelihood of intergenerational poverty. Along with this data, some policy approaches to address child poverty were presented, such as increasing families' incomes and income security, reducing the costs families face to meet basic needs like housing, and building resilience in children to minimize the long-term consequences of growing up in poverty, which include strategies like home visiting, which are linked to improve long-term outcomes for children. Next slide, please. With support from research advocates in the California legislature, the CalWORKs home visiting program was developed to support positive health, development, and well-being outcomes for pregnant and parenting people, families, and infants born into poverty through evidence-based home visiting. Statutory provisions for the CalWORKs home visiting program were established in June of 2018, and the program became operative on January 1st, 2019. For those in attendance who aren't familiar with CalWORKs, it is a public assistance program that provides cash aid and services to eligible needy families in California. CalWORKs serves all 58 counties in the state and is operated locally by county welfare departments. However, the CalWORKs home visiting program is a voluntary program that is supervised by the California Department of Social Services and administered by participating counties, with 41 out of our 58 counties currently participating in the program. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Erika.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Bautista, and I will be continuing the presentation, starting with this brief overview of the key policy components of the CalWORKs home visiting program, which includes the following. Conducting a legislatively mandated evaluation, which we do have available on our website if anyone is interested to view. We also have facilitated and administer a continuous quality improvement work group, a policy development, and conduct technical assistance and provide support to our counties. We also have our statewide partnership with the California Department of Public Health, who oversees the California Home Visiting Program. So our collaborative efforts between the CalWorks Home Visiting Program and CDPH's CHVP were established during the 2018 launch of our program. And the purpose is to strengthen communication between state programs, share statewide home visiting practices, so that our agencies can collaborate on projects to improve home visiting throughout California. We do meet regularly and co-facilitate our early childhood home visiting collaborative. And next slide. So some of the purposes or goals of TANF align with the purpose of CalWorks HVP. One purpose of TANF is to provide assistance to needy families so that children can be cared for in their own homes or the homes of their relatives. Meanwhile, one of the purposes of CalWorks HVP is to support positive health, development, and well-being outcomes for pregnant and parenting people, families, and infants born into poverty through evidence-based home visiting. Another purpose of TANF is to end the dependence of needy parents on government benefits by promoting job preparation, work, and marriage. Meanwhile, a similar purpose of CalWorks HVP is to expand future educational, economic, and financial capability opportunities for our CalWorks participants, and to also improve the likelihood that they will exit poverty. Next slide. As stated before, the CalWorks Home Visiting Program is voluntary and supervised by the Department of Social Services and administered locally by our county welfare departments. So our county welfare departments contract with local agencies to deliver the home visiting services, such as their local county health departments, First Five, and their local county Department of Education, as well as several other local organizations. Next slide. So other home visiting goals for our CalWorks HVP participants are helping young families reach self-sufficiency by improving family engagement practices, supporting health development of young families living in poverty by offering developmental screening and assessments to children up to age 2, and preparing parents for employment by offering job readiness and referrals to remove barriers for employment. So these CalWorks HVP goals for helping families to reach self-sufficiency and preparing parents for employment also align with the TANF goal of helping families end their dependency on government benefits by promoting job preparation. Next slide. So our whole family approach, HVP considers the 2-generational or whole family approach to service delivery because we understand that the child does not exist in a silo apart from the parent or the community, and that the parent and child's well-being are connected. This is something that home visitors have done from the very beginning. These programs and service models were serve both the child and the parent or caretakers simultaneously. The services engage parents or caretakers and the children in activities, exercises, interactions, or learning modules that facilitate the parent or caretaker and the child in learning and developing together. An emphasis on soft skills, hard skills, and responsiveness provide for whole family learning that is necessary for resilience. Next slide. So from the data that we have available on the families that are served by our program, from January 2019 through March 2023, counties have reported enrolling 11,207 participants. 77% of those are from our welfare to work eligible population, which are cases where one or more parent or caretaker relative are members of the CalWorks Assistance Unit and are either mandatory or exempt participants for our welfare to work program, which provides employment services. And then at least 12% are our child-only cases. 9% are our expanded population, which includes families with children over 24 months of age at the time of enrollment in our program. And then 2% are CalLearn, which are our pregnant or custodial teen parents that are under 19 years of age and have not obtained a high school diploma and are receiving aid. Next slide. And here we have a pie chart that does illustrate the out of the 1,340 child-only cases that have enrolled in our program, 3 counties out of the 41 that we have participating make up 58% of all the cases. So we have Orange County, Los Angeles County, San Joaquin County that are serving this particular population, or at least the more than half. Next slide. Thank you. So our home visitors make referrals to services and track when services have been received. Resources that home visitors make to referrals include, but are not limited to, prenatal and infant and toddler care, infant and child nutrition, CalFresh, otherwise known as food stamps or SNAP in most places, English as a second language, immigration, legal services, housing support, developmental screening and assessment, parent education, parent and child interaction, child development and childcare, job readiness and barrier removal, as well as domestic violence, sexual assault, mental health, and substance abuse treatment. For the CalWORKs HPP child-only population, the following are examples of some of the services that they've received most. So early learning setting or parent-child interaction activities, housing support, mental health services, infant and child nutrition services, and some additional services reported by our providers often include food, transportation, and clothing. And to date, child-only cases served by our program have received over 4,600 services. And it's very important because our home visitors have coordinated and collaborated with their local community partners. So they have the resources and the know-all to know how to connect their families with the resources and services that they need. And next slide, please. So here we have some quotes that were collected during our program evaluation, and they describe how the CalWORKs Home Visiting Program has helped support outcomes for our clients. And we will just leave this slide up for a minute or so to give everyone a chance to read some of the quotes. And that concludes our presentation. We do have a dedicated inbox if you would like to reach out to us, and that is our website there. Thank you. Back to you, Janetta.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, both Erika and Ryan. All right, so we are going to have a brief Q&A session. Actually, we have a little bit of time for it, about 15 minutes, which is great. But first, wanted to give some feedback there were several additional folks who had answered the question during the presentation of if you are aware of any additional, any promising programs or services that are available to TANF child only cases, and we had a few folks respond. So I wanted to call out, let's see. So it looks like the Tanana Chiefs Conference in Fairbanks, Alaska, as well as Tuolumne offices serves child only cases in Smith River in California. West Virginia's TANF program offers supportive services to child only cases, such as things like vehicle repair for caregivers and child care costs when over income for subsidized childcare. Oregon has a general funds, which engages in a more meaningful, tangible way with adults in child-only cases, such as to support outcomes for children and the adults in their lives. So thanks so much for responding to those. Really appreciate all of that. So yes, the first two questions coming in are for Anna. So first, it was just the easy one is if you could please share the source of data from a decade ago on the proportion of grandparents eligible for TANF who don't enroll in it. And I want to ask that because I feel like there's others in the audience, myself included, who would love to see that. And then the other one being, if you could talk a little bit about other good cause exceptions to support child support assignments. What other good cause exemptions there might be available besides the good cause for physical and psychological safety?
Sure, thanks, Janetta. So in terms of the 2012 data, It was in a Annie E. Casey report called Stepping Up for Kids, and they were able to get census data and crunch it. I believe it was census data. At any rate, I'm dropping the link in for Janetta, and I'm sure she can share it with you all. But that's a comprehensive report looking at these families. As for the good cause exemption, so under AFDC, there was a lot of guidance from the feds about good cause. And with domestic violence, you could pretty much get out of a lot of things. Like the domestic violence exemption was broad and included a lot of things beyond child support assignment, yes. The feds, to my knowledge, and of course OFA is on the line, but the feds, to my knowledge, do not limit this good cause exemption to cases of violence or fear of violence. And states have a great deal of discretion to meet their own needs and how they define good cause. So Massachusetts, for example, does not limit it to that. There are many grandparents who just want their adult children to be able to reparent. So it's not so much a fear of retaliation or violence, that certainly exists, but it's also just wanting them to maintain their income so that they can potentially reparent. And that, from my understanding, is totally permissible according to the feds under good cause for assigning child support. So basically you can define it as you like.
Thanks so much. Okay, so our next question coming in asks, can nonprofit organizations help assist clients with TANF applications, or do we need to direct them to a navigator program?
I'll jump in here. So TANF applications, we have a lot of caregivers that run grassroots community groups. They're not kinship navigators. They're just grandmas who are doing really good work in their little grassroots nonprofits. And they help the caregivers complete the application. There are a lot of nonprofits from small to big that can do that work, including kinship navigators, which are often run by nonprofit organizations like the one in Nevada that we referenced and that Liliana referenced, Foster Kinship.
And agreed, this could work can happen in community-based agencies. We would hope that you would be sharing this information with your state kinship navigator program so that then they can provide more referrals and to more families who might need assistance with this type of, doing the work of doing the TANF application. We saw in one grantee that they had peer kinship navigators who had laptops and were able to go out into the home, sit with the family, and really help them fill out the application. With that assistance, their numbers increased dramatically of families being able to, as we said, so many times it's just really difficult for someone to complete this form online, especially if there's multiple children in the home. Really having someone become the expert and helping them understand how to do that is so crucial in helping these families.
Thanks so much. All right, we're getting lots of great questions, so it's exciting. On to the next one. Let's see. So Georgia has a grandparents raising children program. Do you all have any suggestions or extra ways that we can help our grandparents?
Well, just one of the most important ways is connecting them to services and supports that include TANF. So we have a number of resources that you can use with the families that you serve, including a grand fact sheet for each state. Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and a couple of tribes now. All the fact sheets except the tribal ones are available in Spanish as well. I'll share that link with Janetta as well. But that, partnering with others, so doing cross-system work with others who are helping the families can really leverage resources and maximize supports for the families. So I'd encourage you to look at that fact sheet for people you can reach out to and partner with. Aging, you saw our umbrella with the 8 systems, and all those systems are important to partner with. Aging is one that's very important and often overlooked. I'll drop in a resource on that too.
And would be happy to connect you with the Georgia Kinship Navigator program if you're not already aware, but they are looking at providing, caregiver support groups, and again, funds for basic needs and stipends to caregivers. to act as liaisons between kinship caregivers. One things that we really are encouraging states as much as possible is to have kinship caregivers be the ones who can be the peer kinship navigators. Since they already have that lived expertise, it is much better coming from them to be the one really helping these families navigate these different systems, which can be TANF, but that could also be the court system, and that can also be child welfare for those that have children that are in foster care. And also your departments of aging. So some of the offices of aging have respite care programs and different support services that are available. We want to make sure that all of the grandparents that are caregivers that are over the age of 55 are accessing those services.
Thanks so much. Hoping that you all could provide any feedback into what are some strategies that Kinship Navigator programs can use to ensure that they provide culturally relevant services to their communities.
Some of the work that some navigators have done is really having bilingual staff or staff that are representative of the different cultures that are there. In Washington State, for example, they've really worked really well with their tribes and have created some tribally cultural adapted Kinship Navigator programs. They've also done some focus groups in Spanish to make sure that they're understanding what are the needs of those Latino caregivers. And I highlighted in those the Gateway podcasts, the one for the Washington program does talk a little bit about the work that they've done in some of the rural areas where there's a large Latino farm worker migrant population as well, and how they're serving those families. But really making sure that Navigator programs are working in collaboration with all of their different community resource partners. And that might also be engaging with churches or faith-based organizations or community organizations who really are the front line and who will be able to identify some of those kinship caregivers in the community and making sure that they're connected to, food, pantry, support services, any basic needs that the families need.
Yeah, I'll second what Liliana said, absolutely across the board. Also, we're hoping to encourage Kinship Navigator programs around the country to also reach out to those children who are placed with kin through Office for Refugee Resettlement, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, because a lot of times those children placed with kin are also kind of overlooked and underserved. And so making sure that Kinship Navigators also reach out to those children and families will be important.
So much. We had one person ask if there's any advice for considering how to build out like a home visitor program, any strategies for building partnerships with other organizations or agencies to support these families?
I assumed that question was for California, but maybe not. Who'd you intend that to go to, Janetta?
My thought was probably for California, but I think others could also chime in too, given their own expertise. So depending on who feels open to it.
Well, it's interesting, we know the importance of going into homes and providing child-specific training and serving these families, but in general, it's not my area, so I will defer to California.
And no worries too if it's stumping you today or yeah, we can always circle back to. Okay, just one more question for now, and I think it was something that was answered before after this person asked the question. Just want to circle back and make sure. So this person asks, why are only relatives of children able to receive TANF? That's a good ending kind of broad question.
Yeah, so again, that is where the feds have left this really flexible for the states and tribes and territories to respond to their own needs and define relative as they like and as best serves their needs. So there are ways to include victim kin and to allow those children in the care of those kin to access TANF child only as well. So there are a few examples there. I know I saw Ali Caliendo foster kinship elevated. The Nevada's doing a bit of it now too. So we'll update our spreadsheet, which is great news. I think more and more people are seeing, that a lot of times there's no difference between someone who's married, who's related by blood, and someone who may be married into the family and knows the child and the family just as well as someone who's related by blood, as an example.
And we're also encouraging the Kinship Navigator programs also to be able to provide services to both children that are being raised either, by direct grandparents, aunts, uncles, or other fictive kin. That could also include, cousins or godparents or others as well. So we're hopeful. Sometimes states might have their own state laws that have created these definitions. But again, we would ask our colleagues to refer back to OFA and to check in with colleagues there, because it's our understanding that there is that flexibility that states have to be able to create their own definitions.
And one last question about that. The person asked, is the tip and toolkit by chance separated by race or maybe other economic factors as well?
The what toolkit? Apologies.
It says the tip and toolkit.
It's probably these those toolkits and tip sheets that we dropped in the chat.
Yes, that would be mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, there are 3 separate toolkits and 3 separate tip sheets divided by Latino grandfamilies, serving Latino grandfamilies, serving American Indian, Alaska Native, and serving African American grandfamilies.
Thanks so much for the clarification. I'm not seeing any more Q&A or questions coming in, so I think we can move on to our final few slides. Great. So just wanted to share a few additional resources. I know there have been a lot shared today with you all. So first is that a recording of this webinar is going, and the slides are going to be available on the OFA PeerTA website in several days and a week or so. So you can feel free to refer back to these all if you want this additional information and want to look something up as well. Also, today's webinar was developed by our PeerTA team. We're always looking to hear feedback from you, including any additional requests you might have for additional products or resources. Also, if you are a TANF agency or you are a partner of a TANF agency, if you're ever looking for technical assistance to support your agency, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to hold a quick call and kind of learn your needs and figure out where to go from there. We provide a lot of free technical assistance. So that's always a nod to that. And then finally, we're going to be having a really short, I think it's like a 4-question survey at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, and just really welcoming any feedback that you might have about the session today. And it'll just be a quick survey that pops up to ask about your experiences and feedback. So with that, thank you all so much. I am going to turn it over to James to give our final closeout.
Thank you, Janetta. And just on behalf of OFA, just wanted to express my thanks for all of you for taking time out of your schedules to attend today's webinar. A special thanks to all of you, our speakers especially, who graciously shared their expertise and time with us all today. Everyone have a great remainder of your day, and we look forward to joining us in future webinars. Thanks again, and take care.